Good morning, Emily.
Nope, it's me, Dan. I'm back.
Twice in a row. What's the occasion?
Emily's volunteering at the Chamber of Commerce today, so you get me 2 weeks in a row here.
Very generous of her to delegate her work to you so she can go volunteer somewhere. Well, then, what are we talking about this week?
So last week we had such a good time talking about the topic of one-time planning versus ongoing relationships, and because the podcast ended up being a little longer than usual, we didn't get to speak on it as much as I'd like to. So I want to talk about it a little bit more here today, as well as some other things. So I want to speak about fee only versus fee based and commission based, turning to ongoing planning versus transactional planning, and then which type is the best and maybe the best for certain situations.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. I did warn you it was going to be boring and that you should have cut me off last week. So, really, I'm going to blame you, Daniel, for letting me talk so much.
I'm happy to take the blame here. It's easier said than done sometimes.
Okay, so are we starting off with the one-time planning versus ongoing planning? Or are we talking about something else first to set that up?
To set it up, I want to speak on fee only, fee based, and commission only financial planners. I think we can articulate it pretty easily because we do it every day. It's our industry, but to somebody who's looking and vetting advisors, I think it's really difficult to parse out the difference. So, first and foremost, as a fee only planning firm, what is it?
So, to be a fee only planning firm is actually almost one of the easiest ones to describe because it's really just put down to this. Our sole source of revenue is our clients directly. So, our clients pay us either financial planning fees or investment management fees directly from their bank account, directly from their investment account for the services we provide. We do not receive revenue from any other source in any other way. It's that simple.
Is it the norm? Or, like, are a lot of firms out there fee only?
No, actually, it is a minority's minority. Estimates are not perfect, but it's estimated that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1.2 to 1.4% of financial planning firms, or even maybe more selectively, financial planners are fee only. And so from that, you have a kind of an ongoing issue where the vast majority of people in the industry are running on a fee based model or a commission only model.
Okay, so fee based sounds like fee only. What's the difference?
Yeah, it sounds like fee only, and there's a good reason for that. It's because the people who thought it up wanted it to sound like fee only. So, fee based is a model in which you can be paid directly by clients the same way that we are, but you can also be compensated via commissions or sales incentives or awards, that sort of thing, for selling products, whether that is an insurance product, a securities product, or even like kind of esoteric stuff like business partnerships or things like that. Essentially, you can get paid based on the transaction as opposed to the advice or the service that's provided. And that's probably the vast majority of people who call themselves financial advisor or financial planner today operate in the fee based realm rather than the fee only realm. And the reason it's fee based is because it happens to sound a lot like fee only. We have tons of clients who will say, "Oh, we're so glad we work with you because you're fee based," and we don't really try to correct them too hard because we know what they mean. But it's a very common business model to be fee based and to be able to get paid by both clients and then to be paid by investment companies or insurance companies to sell products to those clients.
Okay, I have some questions there I want to bookmark, but for the time being, the last one is commission based or commission only. I'd assume that is don't get paid for advice, just get paid for product sales.
It is, and it's in a strange sense. I'm actually a little bit more favorable of the commission only folks than I am of the fee based folks. And for everybody's reference, I actually used to be a fee based planner, so we can talk about that in a bit. But a commission only person gets paid on the transaction. Hey, if you buy this life insurance product, I get a commission. You buy this mutual fund, I get a commission. Like, it's a very straightforward, forthright sort of thing. Now, commissions can be enormous or feel like they're disproportionate on like a work standpoint. I mean, people say the same thing sometimes about real estate agents. Like, why do you get paid 6% of the transaction? That's crazy. But at the end of the day, like, that's the agreement a lot of people have come to. And for a lot of people, particularly for underserved populations or low income populations, I think commission only brokers and agents actually can serve a really important role because they might get paid what feels like a disproportionate amount, by these insurance companies or by these investment companies. But the fact of the matter is that often they are sort of allowing the customer to double dip. I'm going to buy a solution and pay you for your advice around that solution at the same time instead of having to pay you for your advice separately from the solution that I then purchase afterwards.
If I'm working with a commission only planner and they sell me a product, does the commission always come out of my pocket?
This is sort of one of those money is fungible things because you'll hear a lot of excuses around this. So I'll give you an example of where it's obviously out of your pocket, and I'll give you an example where it's not so obviously out of your pocket. An obvious example would be something like a Class A mutual fund share. So the pricing on these has changed over the years, but for example, if you, Daniel, said, I'm going to put $500 into, let's say, an American Funds Growth Fund of America Class A share, it's going to cost you something like 5 to 6% off the top. So you put in $500, they're going to pull 5 or 6% off the top of that, and then the net is going to get invested. And you're going to see that commission kind of come out, and you're going to see that your actual investment amount is lower, and so on. Conversely, you often hear a lot of people say something like, you don't pay me, the insurance company pays me. And the place where you see this a lot is in life insurance sales, where they'll say, no, like 100% of your premium goes into the policy. The policy then has these product expenses and insurance costs and issue costs and all these other internal expenses, but you don't pay me, the insurance company pays me. The insurance company has a different pool of money to pay commissions with. And we can all sort of just play the logical step game here and go, well, okay, how does the insurance company make its money? Well, it takes premiums in for customers, and some of that is used to pay out claims, and some of that's used to run the insurance company. Got it. And what does the insurance company do to incentivize agents to sell its products? Well, it pays them commissions. Got it. So, like, you won't necessarily see like a transactional commission fee come off of your purchase of like an IUL or a whole life policy or something like that. But let's make no mistake here, the company makes its money from taking in consumer premiums, and then it pays its agents with some of the revenue from those consumer premiums.
All right, seems a little bit more complicated than I would have thought at face value, but I get what you're saying about how underserved communities could probably benefit from this transactional relationship if they don't have the ability to afford maybe an ongoing relationship. Uh, Going on to or back to fee only, which is how we operate. What are the advantages to the consumer?
I mean, fundamentally, the biggest problem that you have when there's any sort of sales based compensation involved, whether the person is fee based or commission only, is that you may not have any determination over what that commission is or how much that payment is and whether you think it's reasonable for the services you receive. But also that, unbeknownst to you, the compensation of the person giving you the advice or providing you with the service may be substantially different based on the solution. So, for example, every insurance company will have a commission schedule for each of its specific products. The commission schedule may be higher or lower based on its relationship with certain agents or brokers. So, for example, are you a captive agent of the insurance carrier where you not only work for the insurance carrier, but you only sell the insurance carrier's products? Or are you an independent broker who sort of can shop between? Commissions may vary there. And then if I'm a broker who can shop in between, if I have, let's say, two substantially equal policies in terms of my customer cost, I don't have a disincentive to recommend the one that happens to maybe have a higher percentage payout for me. And in cases where maybe the costs aren't perfectly equal but are close enough, I still sort of have an incentive to go ahead and recommend the one that might pay me more, because the differences might be something like hundreds or thousands of dollars based on which carrier I pick or which product I recommend. And so, there's that old Charlie Munger expression, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. And so all of that to come back to what's the advantage of fee only. If you work with a fee only financial planner, your fees are going to be disclosed to you upfront. Right, that is just part of the process. They will have to give you regulatory documents like a Form ADV, which discloses all the things they have to disclose to the state regulators and the SEC around their services, their fees, their products, their conflicts of interest, et cetera. There can be some arguments around whether certain fee models then are harder to understand or easier to understand, or whether they are completely fixed or whether they're somewhat variable, and what affects the fixed versus variable nature of those things. But assuming everybody's acting ethically, which is always kind of the open question here, a fee only planner should be disclosing their fees to you upfront. You should know what you're paying them upfront, or at least know how, what you're paying them is going to be affected by what variables, i.e., time or investment assets or something like that. And that is fully transparent. And then in addition to that, because it's a fee, I'm going to say fee based here, but what I mean is it's a professional relationship based on a fee form of compensation. There is a fiduciary obligation under the various laws that govern investment advisors that requires us to act in your best interest when providing our services. That fiduciary obligation does not exist in transactional space, right? When you do business on a commission basis. And so part of the advantage to a fee only planner is not only the fee transparency that comes with it, but also the knowledge that because they're fee only, they don't have the opportunity to sort of switch their burden of due diligence, their burden of loyalty to you, and can't, make a recommendation that's in your best interest as a fiduciary and then do something else that is not in your best interest. You know that your entire relationship is going to be kind of covered by this fiduciary wrap.
And we can have a whole conversation on the regulatory authorities and what is in the best interest of a client versus what is just suitable. But I think one of the things you pointed out there that I like is just transparency. Nothing grinds my gears more than hearing somebody say, "Yeah, I work with a advisor. I have no idea how much I pay them." I can't think of another service out there in which somebody doesn't know how much they're paying for something. And I think just being upfront about this is what we're charging, and we need to make up the value in excess of that fee is really important. But I'm thinking through what you said here, and it all makes sense to me. But I'm also thinking through fee based, and I'm like, okay, well, they can provide advice, and then something like an insurance product that we're going to recommend as fee only, anyways. The fee based person can just vet and compare maybe insurance, and then provide that to the client. Why isn't that seen maybe as like a better alternative in this regard?
Well, and remember, as I said earlier, I started as a fee based planner, and I agree with the argument that in the best of all worlds, a fee based planner probably has access to more efficiently or effectively help a client, do something with their finances, right? So we recommend, hey, you need more life insurance. Good news, I can get an application started for you right now. Like there's a lot of advantages to that. I think the challenge that often emerges is, again, there's that kind of shifting from fiduciary responsibility to a best interest or a suitability degree of responsibility that can occur there. And also, again, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. I will say, having grown up in that environment in my early career, right, there was a lot of talk or conversations about good solutions, maybe not best solutions, but good solutions that happen to also get you paid well. And you had a lot of sales reps and you had a lot of like vendor sponsor folks coming through the regional offices and giving classes and instruction. You could go on what's called a due diligence trip, where you could go like visit an insurance carrier or go visit an investment company, and they train you on their products essentially. And all of that can influence and affect your behavior or affect your recommendations. I will say, in total transparency, I used to be a little bit more favorable of things like hybrid life long-term care policies. And it's not to say that I'm not favorable of them today. I think they're still a useful strategy in a lot of ways, but I'll admit my interest in them was certainly not harmed by the fact that I might get paid something like $3, $4, $5, $6, $7,000 to place one, versus doing a planning and analysis and saying you need traditional long-term care coverage. Here's how much it costs. Here it is, or here's a life version, and I'm sort of agnostic to what you do, right? And I can recommend which one I think is better for you, but I'm sort of agnostic to the outcome. I'm not going to pretend that that was not an influence. And I think anybody who claims that they're completely impartial in that sense is not being particularly honest, because there's a world of difference between certain products where you might get paid nothing or a couple $100, or certain products where you might happen to get paid a couple $1,000. And there's a world where you look at that and say, okay, this might be a good solution for this client's problems. How bullish am I on these solutions when I do get paid for it versus don't get paid for it? How impartial am I? And again, anybody who says like I'm perfectly objective, I'm sorry, you are not. Nobody is.
And I resonate with all of that coming from the fee-based world myself too. Is that why you made the transition? Did you see it starting to cloud your judgment in recommendations you were providing clients?
I think I was aware that there was a risk that it was clouding my judgment. I can't point to any particular transaction or recommendation and be like, yeah, that was just for me. Like, it was suitable and I made money. And I can't point to anything like that. But I can say that, again, it wasn't not on my mind. It wasn't something that I was ignoring. And I think by extension from that, the bigger kind of awakening for me was sort of recognition of like, I can recommend all the same solutions, recommend all the same strategies, give all the same advice, and do so without that conflict of interest. So, like, it's nice to be able to place a life insurance policy or disability insurance policy, or to help somebody fund their 529 and get paid for it a little bit or something like that. Like, it's nice, it doesn't hurt. But like, I can recommend funding a 529, buying the life insurance, getting the disability, the long-term care, etc., and not get paid for it, and be just a little more impartial about it, and also just in a real sense, right? Spend less time chasing down insurance applications or appointments for medical exams, or dealing with the tough conversation about why the carrier rated them a standard instead of a standard plus or something like that. So there's just little things like that where ultimately I looked at it and said, I don't know that I'm being heavily influenced by these conflicts of interest, but the fact that they exist feels problematic to me. It feels sort of wrong to me, and I say that gingerly. I'm not going to sit here and say that only fee-only financial planners are good financial planners. I can think of a number of fee-based planners that are not only incredible planners on an objective sense, but I also have an immense amount of respect for. So I'm not going to go so far as to say that you have to be fee-only to do a good job, and fee-based just is always terrible or something like that. But I do I clearly have made the decision to fall on the side of the argument that says, you know what, I'd rather not have the conflict of interest, or rather not do that type of business. And if that means I don't get paid for the specific recommendations, the policies, and somebody else's, that's fine. At least I can act with a good conscience and know that my recommendation simply is what it is because I've done the calculus and done the work, and I know that it's the right choice for this person.
Well said. I think my last question there is just understanding and expertise. So fee based versus fee only, right? We don't sell any insurance. I let my licenses lapse as you did you. Doesn't mean we don't vet and compare multiple policies and carriers for clients. Every once in a while, a agent will point something out in a policy I maybe missed or just didn't have a great understanding on the way they do. As a fee-based planner, is that responsibility now on you as well to have that expert knowledge to the same degree an agent would? As opposed to us, we can kind of rely on their expertise and use our expertise to kind of parse out the differences too.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I come back to my point of sort of liking commission only more than fee based to some extent, right? When somebody's entire living is in this product universe, right, and they have to really know the nuances and know what's going to work best and know all the differences and so on, assuming that they're a competent, smart professional, I think that's a lot more advantageous than somebody who may or may not recommend these investment products, or may or may not recommend these insurance products. They kind of got to juggle investment management and financial planning and the product universe. Like, when we recommend something like a life insurance policy, we're recommending it essentially just from the basis of, we need this much coverage, death benefit. We need to get the best price we can for that much benefit, as long as the carrier is like solvent and well done. And we could research that. But then if we're getting into more complex products like permanent policies with sort of advanced strategies, or long-term care riders, that sort of thing, again, I can calculate the need. That's not the hard part, but it's almost impossible for somebody who doesn't make it their full-time job to follow all the features and kind of best provisions and what carrier is going to be right for the right customers and clients in the right situations. And so I have a lot more respect for somebody who says, like, look, I don't manage money, or I don't really do comprehensive financial planning, but I know every annuity on earth front to back. I know every permanent IUL whole life policy front to back. Right? I have a lot more respect for that person who's honest about it. And that doesn't mean that that person doesn't have conflicts of interest, or doesn't need to be kind of monitored and making sure that their conflicts don't come into play when they make a recommendation. But I can respect that they've said, I'm going to be excellent at this one particular thing, in the same way that we ourselves made the decision years ago that we were going to be excellent at financial planning, and we were going to leave sort of the nitpicks and details of certain products to other experts.
I think my overall learning or theme I'm taking from this is whether it's commission, fee based, or fee only, they all have differences and it might be better for some people versus others. But in any of the three areas, you can do great work.
Certainly, and I even returned just to something I said earlier about like the lower income service and so on, right? Like a lot of us fee only folks tend to sort of act holier than thou around our professional colleagues. Like, well, I'm fee only and therefore I'm a fiduciary, and that means I'm star spangled awesome. And like, sure, but we also tend to serve a more affluent clientele, a higher income clientele. We tend to skew towards white people simply because wealth distribution in the United States isn't equal. Like, there's all sorts of problems with that sort of holier than thou attitude. And for better or worse, right, even though there might be certainly some charlatans or shysters in the world of commission only folks or fee based folks, they do tend to work down market a little bit more often than we do. And so, for better or worse, right, I'll say many people are going to be better off with a suboptimal fee based or commission only advisor than without one. And so even though I might want to kind of nit and pick about certain ways that they do business at certain times, and again, I think the opportunity for fraud or abuse is higher in that universe. They are Some of them are doing great work and serving people who couldn't get our help otherwise, and so I think that's a meaningful distinction to draw.
Great. So last week you had this sharp young man Daniel on the podcast I was listening to, and it sounded like the two of you were really big advocates for, um, transactional hourly engagements as well as like one-time financial plans. But we don't do that here. And you actually didn't say much about the ongoing financial planning process. So can we talk a little bit more about what that looks like, why it's important, and why we do that instead of also offering one-time or transactional plans?
That's been an evolving part of the practice over the years, and I think that story is probably helpful in explaining the what and why. So, when I very first started as a financial planner, when I was fee based and I worked at Waddell and Reed, Waddell and Reed's business model was you charged one time for a financial plan, you built a financial plan, and then from there you might manage money, sell insurance, right? Do something like that on the back end and have an ongoing relationship around these more asset based, insurance based things. And maybe if somebody had a big life change, you charge them again to do a financial plan, but you weren't like doing financial planning in an ongoing way. And when I made the transition to a fee only practice, I decided financial planning was going to be the core of the business, and I would still do investment management because I could now do that with lower costs and certain things because I didn't have all these broker dealer expenses piled on and some of this oversight around how investments and so on work. But as part of that, my original model was okay. I'm going to have a upfront one time planning fee, and then I'm going to offer an ongoing subscription relationship if somebody wants it. And I'm also going to offer investment management separate from that if somebody wants it. That was the original model. And over time, right, I came to find that that was not necessarily the ideal model that I wanted to have.
Why not?
Well, simple, and great question for me here, Daniel. Thank you. The why not really just comes down to recognizing friction in certain places where it shouldn't have existed. So I found a couple of things. I would find some people would do the initial one-time plan thing and then not do investment management, not do subscription, and that was fine. I didn't like try to push them or arm twist them into it. But then what I would see short term, and what I've seen even longer term from that is there would be a lot of folks who would then, be emailing, calling, writing, whatever, after the engagement was over, and I didn't really have a good mechanism for addressing their needs at that time. Like, well, you paid me for the plan, you declined subscription, you declined the ongoing support, but here you are asking for it, but you're still saying, no, I don't want to pay for that. I just kind of want you to do free work for free. That was one particular issue. What I also then saw was a lot of failure to implement, where a lot of people were sort of like being given the plan and the checklist, and they're like, all right, I'm going to go and do this. And then they would come back a year or two later and they did not really do much, if any, of it. And so there was also that recognition for that. When it came to the distinction then of the investment part, same sort of problem. I had a lot of people say, like, no, I think I'm fine managing my own stuff. And then they wouldn't take the investment recommendations, or in a strange way, even worse, they would take the recommendations, but they would start to do what I like to call investment management by 20 questions, where they'd be like, all right, Dan, I want to buy a municipal bond ETF, and I'm thinking it's going to be short term. Which of these three would you recommend, right? And then once I've done that, well, I see you recommended this, but would it make sense to split it up between these two? And then 2 months later, something would change in the market, and they'd come back and say, Dan, I know I just bought these municipal bond ETFs, but now they're down 2%. I'm really worried that I should be doing something different. Can you recommend something else? And it's like, am I managing your portfolio, or are you? So, the long run of this is we finally over the years iterated down to just a core net worth model, right? We said, look, we are going to charge 0.5% of net worth. That's going to be the annual cost. We will include investment management in that, whether you choose to use it or not, right? And we are going to have at least a 1 year relationship. And almost all of our clients continue past that 1 year mark, just because we tend to find that our relationships are beneficial longer on an ongoing basis for a variety of reasons, like life changes, objectives change, needs change, problems arise, and so on. But also, in that sense, then that just sort of spares us from this issue of, oh no, I don't want to pay you for that, but I'm still going to try to get it from you. And that's just sort of where we've come down. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with one-time projects like we started with. It's not to say there's anything wrong with self-managing investments or something like that, but just that fundamentally what I've found over the years is my preference has been and my experience has been every time that I've worked with people outside of sort of a comprehensive, truly, fully wrapped around relationship, there tends to be more friction, more problems, and more issues that arise than in cases where we just say, yes, we're going to do everything. And lo and behold, if we do everything, turns out most of those same issues and problems don't seem to crop up.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. So to summarize that, ranking the success of a financial planner is hard. It's like, what metric do you decide to use? I think one of the valuable ones is just how many of your clients achieve their desired outcome over time. And it sounds like to me, one of the reasons we value an ongoing relationship is almost because more gets done, more gets implemented, and we're able to see that out, which is how clients achieve things in a greater amount than maybe if we had done one time engagements, it sounds like.
And that's a really big part of it. I feel really bad about the cases where people have come in, gotten a plan, and not done anything with it. Because then you sit there and you go like, well, like what was that? What was that for? Like, I had fun building the plan and working with you, so like I got something out of this. But like, what was it really worth if you came in and paid thousands of dollars and spent all this time and had all these conversations and then you didn't get anything out of that relationship? And that's something we're even mindful of when people come in. We do occasionally have people come in who have an asset level or an income level where we have to look at them and be honest and say, look, you'd benefit from financial planning, but you're at a certain economic, personal, financial stage where we are too much of a service provider for you. And even though you would benefit from our advice and our guidance, right, the cost that you're going to incur by working for us is going to be equal to or greater than the benefit we can provide you in the short term. Might pay out long term, but I think you're better served either with a different type of provider, or I mean, there's been some cases where it's like, look, I'll tell you what my advice would be for the next 6 months. It'd be pay off your credit card debt. You don't need to pay me, $2,400 minimum over the next 6 months to just tell you every month, yep, keep paying off your credit cards. Please take that $2,400 and deploy it towards your credit cards. And then if you want to come back and talk to us afterwards, we're happy to give you more guidance or more advice or help you, past that point. But today, there's just one thing that matters, and you should do that. And then if you feel like you need help after that, happy to talk to you again.
Okay, well, what if somebody comes into our world? It does make sense financially for them to work with us on an ongoing manner. They work for us for a few years, with us for a few years. Is there ever a relationship or an instance in which they work for with us ongoing, but at a certain point it stops being valuable for them?
Not so much in the comprehensive sense, because, for example, we're often still doing things like the investment management and so on, and that often is paying for us on its own, let alone the other advice or ad hoc things. So we do have some clients who come in for their quarterly meetings, and the meeting's like 10 minutes long. We're like, hey, what's new with you? They're like, not much. Or they're telling us about their trips or vacations they took, and then, hey, do we have any questions about this? No. Do you have anything you want to recommend to us right now? No. Okay, great to see you. See you in a couple months. And they just kind of roll on with their lives, but they're perfectly happy to keep engaging us. That's also part of the kind of ongoing long-term comprehensive nature. Is what I think is an interesting observation I've had over the years is, a couple of years ago, before we finally just shifted to this all in one kind of no exception sort of structure, is we have some clients that came in at that time who were kind of, eyeballing us, being kind of tough in their initial presentation and being, I'm gonna hire you, you're gonna build us a plan, you're gonna give us advice, and like when the initial duration's over, like we're done, we're out. And we're still working with those people. And it's not because we tied them up or twisted their arms or made it hard for them to leave or something, but because what they discovered as part of the iterative process of financial planning is that there's not only just strict financial value in taxes saved or investment mistakes avoided or estate plans established and so on. It's also that the iterative relationship itself is valuable for sort of their peace of mind, for making space and holding space to have conversations about this and think about their finances with an objective third party. I think that has been an enormous value proposition that a lot of people don't anticipate. So even in cases where we have some of those clients are still sort of on a legacy model where they pay us for planning only, they don't delegate investment to us, and they're still happy to keep coming back year after year. And we're really happy to keep working with them year after year because those people have also shown that they have a little bit higher self efficacy and they do actually implement some of that advice that for other parties we did see in the past were not good at implementing when left to their own devices.
All right. So all that to say, which model or type for financial planning is best?
Whatever people pay me to do. Jokes aside, realistically, it's not a question of what is the best model, and I've written about this extensively. If somebody wants to go on the website and search for why fee debates are pointless, I've written about this a lot. But the basic gist is going to be right. It's not a question of what is the best model, the best service model, best pricing model. It is what is the best pricing model that aligns to a service model the most effective way for the right type of person. So in that context, right, for us, the best client is a client who wants a comprehensive ongoing relationship with highly qualified and skilled financial planners who are going to really take as much off their plate as they can and delegate as much as they can manage or as much as we can do for them to us. So that way they can focus on the things that their life is better spent on. And that's sort of a premium Cadillac version of service compared to some other services. And that's okay. If somebody doesn't need that premium Cadillac service, that's great. There are other models for them.
Okay, let me just shoot off some models specifically then. Let's talk about hourly planning. Who is the ideal client for hourly planning?
I think hourly planning is good for two demographics, and they're very different demographics. One is a demographic that really just has a super niche specific problem that is not exposed to a lot of third party complexity or kind of third issue complexity. So, for example, a lot of people will come in and say something like, I don't really want financial planning, but I'd like you to manage my money. And here's the thing, like managing money itself is not that complex in terms of like implementation. But the problem is that investments are affected by a lot of other things. They're affected by your income. They're affected by how much you've saved, where you're saving, the tax treatment of the types of the accounts that you're using. So there's a lot of third-party exigent factors where your investments can affect other parts of your financial planning needs, and your other areas of financial planning needs can affect your investments. And so even though you might just say, all I want you to do is manage this money for me, that actually can expose a lot of risks and problems where I don't think like money management on an hourly basis is necessarily a great approach because it can sometimes lend itself to an issue where we say, well, I only want to pay you for like an hour. So if you could just like pick investments for me and then maybe I'll talk to you again next year and pay you for another hour and you can adjust investments for me, it becomes a little bit challenging. Now I know an hourly financial planner out in Washington that has a firm that does a really good job of investment management on an hourly basis. But part of that is more of I'm going to quote you an expected cost on an ongoing basis and I'm going to bill for it hourly, which is a little bit different. So I think hourly is really good for somebody who has a really select, really niche issue like, hey, I'm filling out the FAFSA. Can you help me fill out the FAFSA? Or, hey, I just want to talk with somebody about this before I kind of pull the trigger on this decision. And I just want to kind of get a third party's input and maybe tell me if I'm missing something or if I'm not thinking about something. I think it's really good for those sorts of limited scope engagements or in cases where it's going to be a project, but it's a short project. Alternatively, and I want to be careful with this because I said it was a different type of person, but I think hourly can work for somebody who is perhaps a little overconfident. And I say that gingerly because I don't want to make anybody upset when I say that, but hourly can be very appealing to some people because they sort of think they got it all under control, but they admit they could maybe use a second opinion. And you see this a lot where probably every 6 months there's an article in something like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times talking about, these really wealthy people are foregoing the traditional financial advisors and they're hiring hourly planners and they're saving so much money. And like, cool, they're definitely saving a lot of money on that. I don't disagree because they're foregoing comprehensive, ongoing, holistic relationship, and so you get what you pay for. But in that sense, I do think the hourly planner makes sense for those folks, if only because if you have $10 million or $15 million, please don't just assume you're doing it all fine on your own. right? Like, please, eat the $300, $400, $500 hourly fee and just talk to a professional and just at least get that checkup every once in a while to just at the bare minimum make sure you're not completely fucking something up. And so, again, on two ends of the spectrum, I think for people who need limited engagement, hourly can be great. And I think for people who are too egotistical for their own good, they should have just the tiniest slice of humble pie every once in a while and pay somebody for a little bit of time to double check them.
Makes sense to me. What about just pure assets under management?
I mean, assets under management makes sense when you fundamentally really are looking for an investment based relationship, right? So I'll give you a good example. We manage an endowment for a nonprofit in Denver. That's our relationship. They gave us $1 million a couple of years ago. We invest that $1 million for them. We are incentivized to preserve and grow that $1 million for their benefit. And that's what they want us to do. Like, that's a clean cut, easy model. Now, what I'm going to have to caveat here is the vast majority of fee-based and fee-only financial planners run a assets under management model for services beyond investment management, including things like comprehensive financial planning and ongoing financial planning relationships. That's one that I have a hard time with because you are billing for a really specific part of their financial needs and financial plan. And for better or worse, that produces some conflicts of interest that I'm always a little bit hesitant on. Things like paying off debt versus saving and investing, buying tangible real estate or illiquid business assets instead of keeping your money in the market. Like, it's a very popular model for a lot of reasons, but I'm always a little cautious around that. I think an investment only relationship or an AUM only relationship makes sense when the thing we're really paying for is the management, not so much when we're paying for the comprehensive relationship. And I'm sure somebody's going to send me a nasty gram now that I've said that, but it's just sort of my feeling on it. I can see a lot of places where it works. I've done it in the past personally, particularly when I was at Waddell and Reed. But I do just look at it and say, like, there's a really nasty conflict of interest in the middle of that model. So I'm always kind of careful about recommending it in the context of comprehensive financial planning.
So we do a net worth subscription model, but we also do manage investments for clients. Is that particularly common?
Net worth is extremely uncommon. I only know of a couple of firms that use a net worth model, and essentially it's because net worth, to me, sort of solves for some of the problems with an assets under management model. Because now we don't have a conflict around whether you pay off debt versus whether you invest. We don't have a conflict about whether you do rental properties versus the stock market. Like, we're a lot more indifferent to how you accomplish your financial outcomes. I think there's a fair criticism here that, well, you're including my house in this, and you're including my car in this, and you're including that 2 acres I have up in the mountains that I'm not really doing anything with. It's like there's some criticisms here about getting paid for assets you're not advising on or directly managing as consistently or regularly. I think that's a fair pushback. But the offering of net worth is designed to mitigate the conflict of interest around something like an assets under management model. Now, we manage investments under that model as well. And that's, again, it's baked into our pricing structure. And again, we do that less because we care about managing the assets from a revenue standpoint, because it's not really a revenue driver for us. But we do it more so because we believe clients are best served by focusing on what they're really good at, and they're best served by us by letting us do what we are really good at.
Okay, that raises one final question then. Are there fee only planners out there who just do planning and don't manage investments for clients?
Yeah, so this is called advice only. I think advice only is really well served in that project space and that hourly space. Somebody says, like, look, I'm not going to manage investments. I think there's a lot of different reasons that people like to offer that. Some people have argued that that is sort of like a more pure relationship than just a fee only where you do potentially manage investments, whether mandatory or not. I'm not quite sold on the purity of it because I think the honest truth for a lot of people in that model, not all of them, but for a lot of people in that model, is that they're actually just not comfortable or competent at managing money. And so they're sort of trying to overcome that discomfort by saying, I'm better for not doing it. Because I look at that and say, it's sort of in the same sense like the fee based thing. If there was a large amount of no commission, no fee insurance products, I'd consider getting us back into writing life policies directly or disability policies directly or something. And there are a couple of fee-based products out there in that universe, but again, it's not a well-developed marketplace because I don't mind the idea of making it more efficient to implement something for clients, right? So in the same way that we do investments. but insurance is harder to do for commission reasons. On the other side of that, when I look at the advice only thing, it's like, well, it's purer to not manage money for clients. Like, well, hold on. If I offer to pay, let's say if I offer to do comprehensive financial planning and wealth management, including investment management, for $10,000 flat, or let's say $1,000 a month flat, and I include investment management in that, why is that somehow worse than if I charge $12,000 a year flat for somebody and I won't manage their investments? That's something where I look at it and I know that the answer to this has something to do with like the stickiness of the relationship and moving accounts around. Maybe it is or isn't in a client's best interest. I think it's a case by case problem, but it's something where I think advice only planning makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, particularly again in those hourly and more project models. I'm not sure that I'm sold on it in the ongoing relationship space as a better model.
All right. I've officially exhausted all my questions for this week, Dan.
You're making it easy on me, but that does mean then that I'm going to have one question for you, which is, Daniel, in the whole 7 days that it's been since you sat in this studio with me, what have you learned you think our audience would benefit from?
Let's see. So we have an intern for the summer, and I think it's a lovely privilege to be able to work with her. And one of the unique things I think she does really well is kind of challenge maybe beliefs that I already have or things I just do on a day to day basis that I might not actually internalize or think about. And it challenges me to maybe articulate and teach something that I just inherently know how to do. And it's like, oh, I know how to do this, but I don't know it well enough to maybe teach it to somebody. Or she'll question why I do something in a day to day routine. And I realize I haven't examined it in a while, and it might have just be a habit I've picked up or something I'm now doing. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think it kind of relates to something you mentioned with the hourly model. You may have habits in your financial life or things you're doing that you just do or think are wise, and you've never had somebody challenge or just point out some of those things and ask you why. Why are you doing this? Or why aren't you doing this? And whether it's a financial plan, my work day, getting a golf lesson to point out bad habits I've picked up, or anything in between. I think it's healthy to have dialogue and observations from time to time on maybe things you don't see because you do them.
Well, and I'll just throw it out there as well. The research has indicated that the time your brain is the most engaged is when you have to teach something. I'll say I became a better financial planner when I started hiring people and training people to be financial planners. And I think you will probably be a great beneficiary of that as well.
You must have a pretty engaged brain then.
I'm trying not to. I'm really trying to coast, but you guys make it hard. The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.